Good afternoon to all of you, venerable sirs, venerable madam, and my dear friends in Dhamma. I must thank Professor Senanayake for this opportunity to deliver, as he said, 201st Dhamma talk of servants of Buddha, and that's being uploaded online. In fact, it is Professor Senanayake who gave me the topic Agganna Sutta to speak on. So I'm happy to speak about the Agganna Sutta, which is described as a discourse on evolution of society. Now, I think before we start talking about Agganna Sutta, I think it is important to understand the background, and the background can be traced or can be described by referring to, I would say, Accinteya Sutta. Accinteya Sutta is a discourse on inconceivables, because now many describe Agganna Sutta as a discourse dealing with the beginning of the world. But in Accinteya Sutta, or discourse on inconceivables, Buddha says, beginning of the world should not be tried to be understood. So, Accinteya Sutta is about 4 inconceivables. Buddha says, there are 4 inconceivables you should not try to understand. You should not try to comprehend and understand 4 things. What 4? One is the range of the Buddha, the Buddha's range, what he can do, probably in a plain language. And number 2 is the range of meditative absorptions. The range of meditative absorptions is also not comprehensible. And one should not try to understand what absorption or jhana. With jhana, one can do. So that is also one inconceivable. Number 3 is the exact working of Kamma. How the Kamma theory works. Because a lot of people try to understand, try to define how the Kamma theory works. But Kamma theory works in a very, very sometimes I would say funny way. That is why we see good people don't live long lives, and sometimes bad people live long lives, and sometimes we try to understand why it happens like that. So Kamma theory is also something the Buddha said, don't try to understand, because it is not easily understood. And number 4 is the beginning of the world. Origin of the world also should not try to be understood. It is difficult to understand, difficult to explain. Now, having said so, in Accinteya Sutta, Buddha tries to describe, I wouldn't say the origin of the world, but how the world system expanded and developed. I mean, it doesn't really deal with the origin of the world. The sutta does not deal with the origin of the world, but it talks about how the world system expanded and came into the current state. So that is one thing we should understand. So it is not inconsistent with Accinteya Sutta. In my opinion, it is not inconsistent with Accinteya Sutta, and Accinteya Sutta says, don't try to understand the beginning of the world. And here in Agganna Sutta, the Buddha does not deal with the beginning of the world. I think that is very important to understand, because sometimes when we look at the Agganna Sutta text at a cursory glance, one would think that it describes the origin of the world system, but it is not so. So what the Buddha had said is that in Accinteya Sutta, the 4 inconceivables are beyond ordinary human thought, and one should not try to understand it through logic. So the same way, it applies finally to the origin of the world, and the sutta does not deal with the origin of the world, but evolution. Now, actually, Agganna Sutta is a very, very important sutta in Digha Nikaya. It is the 27th discourse in Sutta Pitaka. And it deals with the evolution of society and kingship and emergence of the caste system. Evolution of society, evolution of kingship, and also evolution of the caste system. Because caste system was very, very central to the Indian society then. And this is also sometimes when you read Agganna Sutta, one gets the idea that it deals with cosmology, because how the cosmos have behaved, and but actually lot of scholars describe it as a very satirical discourse, satirical, targeting the Vedic teachings on evolution of society, evolution of kingship, and the caste system. Because Brahmanism talks about these three areas in a particular way, and this is Agganna Sutta provides a good critique of the Vedic teachings on evolution of society, evolution of kingship, and evolution of the caste system. Now, and it also says, Agganna Sutta deals, specifically says that everything in society has come to the present status. I mean, social degeneration has taken place due to greed. Greed is the central reason why the society has degenerated. Now, it's a slight departure. We can talk about it. It's a slight departure from dependent origination theory. We can talk about that. And then both Accinteya Sutta and Agganna Sutta reject or displace the authority of Vedic cosmology. Very clearly, both these suttas displace, criticize, and reject Vedic cosmology, because Vedic cosmology is everything was created by Brahma. And man was created by Brahma, woman was created by Brahma, and the world was also created by Brahma. And this is the Buddhist critique of the Vedic teachings on cosmology. Now, and it is also a critique of the caste ideology, but it's Agganna Sutta provides a very nice story. It's a very nice story about the evolution of society. But now here, when we say story, I mean, sometimes it's like a fairy tale. Now, this Agganna Sutta should not be taken literally, but it should be taken allegorically, because the meanings are very deep. If you try to take it very literally, you will get a different understanding of what the sutta had tried to describe and convey. That is also very important to understand, not to take it literally, but you have to look deep into the teachings and why certain things have been said in a particular way. Now, how this sutta came to be delivered, or discourse to be delivered, was that there were two Brahmin mendicants who were awaiting ordination, called Vasetta and Bharadwaja. There were two Brahmin youth, and one day they went to the Buddha, and they were engaged in a conversation, and then they were talking. Since they were Brahmin youth, they were obviously talking about the caste system and how the Brahmins were treated as a superior caste in the society. And then Buddha started rejecting that and arguing against that, because in the Brahmanical society or the Indian society, Brahmins were always treated they had an elevated position, and they were treated differently, and they were placed at a higher position. Now, basically, this talks ends with the Buddha's assertion that those who have ended defilements are the true Brahmins, or are the superiors. Those who have ended defilements, be they aristocrats, traders or farmers, menial workers, or even Brahmins, because he categorically said aristocrat or even a menial worker, if he had ended defilement, he is superior than a Brahmin who had not ended defilements. That is the central theory in the Accinteya Sutta when it comes to the caste system. Now, here in Agganna Sutta, castes are described in a particular order. First caste is Kshatriya, that is the ruling class. And then the second is Brahmins. Third is Vaishyas or traders. And fourth is menial workers, Sudras. And actually here, when we talk about Vaishyas, what it means is some people argue, some Western scholars argue that Vaishya is various. That means they engaged in various work, various trades, businesses, and various works. And when they travel from place to place, and then when they describe them as Vaishya to gain entry into other territories, the term visa came from etymology of visa is Vaishya. Vaishya is various. Those who travel for various purposes were called Vaishya. And at that time, when a Vaishya was entered, that was called visa. And that's a Western scholarly interpretation of the etymology of the term visa. We apply for when we want to go to other countries. So that is, on a side, I thought I would mention that. And then, so as I said, in the Agganna Sutta, Kshatriya, Brahmana, Vaishya Sutta. And then in certain other suttas like Tevijja Sutta, Assalayana Sutta, Singalovada Sutta, and lot of other suttas, Brahmins are placed first, as opposed to Agganna Sutta placing Kshatriyas as the first caste. So we can talk about that also. Why Brahmins came to be placed first as against Kshatriyas, and why Kshatriyas came to be first in the Agganna Sutta. Then when we talk about evolution of society and evolution of the world, it talks about Agganna Sutta specifically talk about, it begins like, once upon a time, once upon a timeless time, I would say. Once upon a timeless time, the world was in a contraction mode. The world was in a contraction. And then it started expanding. And it was full of water. There was no earth. There was no earth in this in our globe. It was full of water and it was pitch dark. There was no light whatsoever. It was very, very dark. And when the world system started expanding, beings from Abhassara Deva world or Abhassara world, which is a Deva, described as a Deva world, descended into this world. And they had no physical bodies. They had only mind bodies. They were mind made and self-luminous. They were self-luminous, like what we call in Sinhala Kalamet. They were self-luminous, and they were traveling in the air, traveling through the air, and they were basically feeding on delight. Happiness was their food. And that is how the first beings came to this world, according to this sutta. And then it says that after a long period of time, this system worked for a long period of time, and after a long period of time, now in this watery globe, a crust started forming, a very sweet tasting crust. The earth crust started forming, and then these beings who were floating in the air or traveling in the air got this idea of tasting this earth crust. And then they tasted it. And when they tasted it, that is how the greed appeared, because they started liking it. Liking and craving, because you like something and thereafter you want it more. They wanted to taste it more and more, and craving started, or craving appeared. That is how, according to Sutta, the craving first appeared among beings or in beings. And then it says that with this greed, or with this crust being eaten by these beings, they started developing physical bodies. They started developing physical bodies, and then they descended on earth. The earth crust was fully formed, and then light appeared slowly over a long period of time, maybe billions of years. And that is how the beings came into the world. And then they became humans. And then after some time, as a result of this earth crust they were eating, genders form, male, female genders came into being. The gender formation was as a result of the food they ate. And then what happened was, the evolution is, okay, after this sweet crust was over, they had to find food, and then they started cultivating. According to this sutta, the first cultivation was paddy cultivation. And in that paddy cultivation, in the first paddy cultivation, there was no husk. It was straight eatable. There was no processing needed. And they started eating paddy. And eating paddy started. Then there was more greed. There was a desire to collect paddy. And then started land ownership, fencing, and thereafter disputes. So that is how the social order started evolving. And then what happened was, especially because of this paddy cultivation, certain people were cultivating paddy, and certain others were not cultivating paddy. They were lazy. So lazy started stealing from the people who cultivated. And when the stealing started, there was social disorder, and slowly, for a long period of time, social chaos setting. And then here, when the society started degenerating, when chaos set in, and there was theft, corruption rampant, this society had to find a solution. So what this society did was, they got together and they found the most able, wise, most able, a person with a convincing speech, handsome, these four qualities. They found a person with these four qualities. He had to be wise, intelligent, and he should be able. He should be a good speaker. And he found this person and went to him and told him, look, you be the leader of the society and you bring order. So that is how, and then they called him Mahasammata, because everybody got together and selected this person and elected as Mahasammata, the king, elected by the people. And then the first politician of the world was born. That is how the first politician of the world was born. Now here there is a very strong message. What is the message? The leader is not just elected. He should be first selected. The society has to select him. Society has to screen the leader, whether he is intelligent, whether he is wise, ethical conduct, is he able, and convincing speech. Actually, in certain places, in commentaries, commentaries to Accinteya Sutta, some scholars have said that he should be dear to Brahmins also. The leader should be dear to the clergy, because without the clergy's support, the country cannot be ruled easily. So that is also one qualification that had been attributed to a good leader. A good leader should possess. So what they did was, basically they went to him. They said, look, you are the best person, rule this country, rule this society, you rule this society and bring order. And his first job was to stop stealing, stop theft, punish them, and bring law and order, maintain law and order. And in return, they had to give him something. And they gave a share of rice, share of the harvest. And this is how the taxation system developed. Taxation now even today, what do people expect? Paying taxes. The main thing people expect is law and order. Law and order in the society is the first thing people expect when they pay taxes. So, and that came from a society, the original society or the society that existed long time ago. So it is very consistent with the people's aspirations today. So there is no difference. The only thing is actually what differs now, if you look at Sri Lankan context, what it differs is in Sri Lanka and in certain other countries, leaders are just elected. And Dhamma means, according to Agganna Sutta, leaders should not be just elected. They should be first selected. Thereafter, only they should be elected, if all people agree. That is a very, very core message to the modern society when it comes to the political, developing a political system that suits a country or a society. And we have had a very notable departure from those teachings in Sri Lanka, and I must say that. And then that is why, and here the idea is leadership is not inherited. It is not a heirloom. Leadership is not inherited, and it's not a divine authority. Now here also, when the Buddha says the leadership is not inherited and it's not divine given, that also challenges Brahmanical law, Vedic teachings, because in the ancient society, in the Indian society at the time of the Buddha, people thought leadership is divine and it's inherited and it comes through the bloodline. But Buddha directly challenged that system, saying the person who should rule a country is the best person in that society, and he should be ethical and he should be able. And then here, the other point is power is always granted by the people. Power should not be assumed by the leader. It should be granted by the people. People should control the extent of power that is granted to a leader. So that is also a central teaching in the Agganna Sutta. And then actually in this Sutta, the Buddha had elevated Kshatriyas over Brahmins as the most superior caste. Because why? Because Kshatriya is the central point in society. Because if Kshatriya is not right, if the Kshatriya, the ruling class, is not ethical, if he is not governing properly, society descends into chaos. So that is why the Kshatriya had been placed first in that caste system or the order of priority. In the caste system, Kshatriya had been placed first by the Buddha in this sutta. And then this also suggests that the caste system has developed due to functional roles played by the people. It's a functionality of the society that is reflected in the caste system, where the ruler is Kshatriya, his job is to rule, and then Brahmins role is to study, meditate, and teach, and then Vaisya's role is trade and business, running of the economy, and then manual labor who support trade and business. But one notable point is in this sutta, if you read very carefully, Brahmins came last as a caste. As if you take the order in which the caste system developed, Brahmins came last, because in the society, when the society started degenerating only, some people went into the forest and started meditating and trying to find answers. So then the other idea is that the world began with greed, and then food, and then sex, and thereafter politics. Because in that society, Agganna Sutta also speaks about how households develop. Why people look for dwellings really, or houses. Because in this ancient primitive society, when genders appeared, male, female appeared, they started having sex. And when people saw them having sex, they denounced them. They asked them, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then those people moved into the forest and built houses. That is how the household system came into being according to this Agganna Sutta. That is why the Sutta, the social order is described as greed, thereafter food, thereafter sex, and then politics. And then Sutta, this discourse specifically talks about the need of the leader to rule according to Dhamma. According to Dhamma. Now, this is a very interesting topic to speak on, because sometimes we hear now even venerables in Sri Lanka, when they deliver sermons. Now, recently also I was listening to a sermon, and the monk who delivered that sermon said, our country's problems are due to people not living in the Dhamma. People don't practice Dhamma. People have moved away from Dhamma. Now, sometimes people don't properly understand. I wouldn't say misunderstand, but people don't properly understand the meaning of Dhamma. Now, sometimes when a monk says this, we think, okay, Dhamma means observing and living in 5 precepts. And Noble Eightfold Path, trying to understand Buddha's teachings, going to temples, having Bodhi pujas or whatever, and maybe offering alms, going to temples, observing seal or whatever is Dhamma. But Dhamma, now, that is why this Dhamma, the word Dhamma has to be defined properly. According to Buddhist text, the way the Buddha had used the term Dhamma or the word Dhamma has, according to different definitions, between 8 to 10 different meanings. 8 to 10 distinctly different meanings can be given to the word Dhamma. Now, one meaning is, of course, what the Buddha taught, what is in Nikaya text. And then good conduct and behavior of a person is also described as Dhamma. The natural world system, how the natural world works, is also Dhamma. And it specifically says, Buddha had specifically said, good conduct of kings, good economic management, good governance is also Dhamma. So when somebody says the rulers should be ruling according to Dhamma, it does not necessarily mean that he should be a Buddhist. That is not what is meant by rulers ruling according to Dhamma. Dhamma means rulers ruling well, rulers ruling according to good principles, good economic management. They are all contained in this meaning of Dhamma. It's very, very important to understand, because we often misunderstand Dhamma to mean only the Buddhist text. It is not so. So that's why even in Catholicism, or the teachings of other religious teachers, if they are good, that is also Dhamma. So that is something you need to understand. And then, here, when we talk about Dhamma, rulers ruling according to Dhamma, Chakravarti Sihanada Sutta is also an important sutta that can be brought into the Agganna Sutta, the context of Agganna Sutta, as much as Accinteya Sutta. Cakkavatta Sihanada Sutta is also an important discourse because it describes what is ruling, what is meant by ruling according to Dhamma. Now here, dharmic leader or the ruler who is ruling according to Dhamma, according to Cakkavatta Sihanada Sutta, is a one who distribute wealth fairly, who encourages generosity and upholds justice over partiality. And the king, according to Cakkavatta Sihanada Sutta, the king who does not distribute wealth fairly, who does not provide proper economic opportunities to people, the king who does not encourage generosity, the king who does not uphold justice, will bring poverty and moral collapse in that society. And you can relate this story to what is happening in Sri Lanka and try to understand where we have missed the bus. Now, here, Cakkavatta Sihanada Sutta talks about, Dhammic rulership. And then we should also talk about Kuttadanta Sutta in relation to what we are talking about, Agganna Sutta. Kuttadanta Sutta is a sutta delivered to a Brahmin who had pointed tooth. Kuttadanta is pointed tooth. He had pointed tooth, and this was delivered to the Brahmin Kuttadanta, where this is where the Buddha talks about 4 factors of production. Now, we think when we study economics, we think factors of production, being land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, was spoken for the first time by Adam Smith, a British scholar, British economist. But it is not so. It's not Adam Smith who spoke first about the 4 factors of production. It was the Buddha who spoke about factors of production for the first time, according to Nikaya text. Kuttadanta Sutta deals with land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. And here, actually, the idea is a ruler, a good ruler will give utmost priority to agriculture, develop agriculture in the country. Because in this sutta, the first factor of production is giving land and seeds to farmers to develop agriculture. Agriculture is very central to a prosperous economy. And then it talks about land, labor. Labor is basically, Kuttadanta Sutta talks about running the economic system, running the government, encouraging private sector, private enterprise, and also state enterprise, where people will receive reasonable wages, good wages. That is also, Buddha had spoken very specifically about labor being paid reasonable salaries without exploitation. And then capital, Buddha had spoken about traders and industrialists being given capital at reasonable price. Reasonable price of capital is interest. So at reasonable interest, the state should provide capital to traders and industrialists. And the Buddha had said in the Kuttadanta Sutta, again, once relating to, ruling according to Dhamma, 4 factors of production. If you handle these 3 factors of production being land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship will develop in that country. Now, you can relate once again, compare what exactly is happening in Sri Lanka, where our entrepreneurship development is only about 2%. If 100 youth aspire to be entrepreneurs, only 2 become entrepreneurs, whereas in America, it's about 20%. So you can see how we are handling our factors of production, whether we are encouraging agriculture, whether we are having a system to pay reasonable wages to people, and whether we are providing capital at reasonable cost, whether we have been providing capital at reasonable cost to people. When you say reasonable cost, where we talk about interest, collaterals, recovery processes, helping businesses in difficulty, all these things are encapsulated in providing capital to people. And then now here once again, the Buddha had also spoken against giving people money. Just distributing money, Buddha had specifically discouraged. He had rejected the theory that by distributing money, the economy can be developed. And that is also something where we have gone wrong, in my opinion. Again, not ruling according to Dhamma. We have been trying to distribute money through subsidies. Could be Janasaviya, could be Aswasuma, could be Samurdhi or whatever, to people who do not deserve help. But of course, the Buddhist thought is that vulnerable sections of the society, vulnerable people in the society only should be taken care of. Others should be given economic opportunities to accumulate wealth. And that is also very, very important, because Buddha had specifically said, if the king, when poverty is rampant in the country or in the society, if the king is distributing money with a view to uplifting the people, bringing people out of poverty, the result is the government will collapse, or the government finances will run dry. And that is exactly what has happened in Sri Lanka. And that is why, again, we are saying that we have departed from Dhamma, because we are not managing the economy according to good practices. I would say Buddhist, but good practices, because Dhamma is not only Buddhist. So, and then here I wanted to say, in conclusion of this section, I wanted to say, now in Agganna Sutta, Tatya is first, Brahmana second, third Vaishya, fourth Sutta, and in certain two suttas like Devija, Vasetta, Asalayana, and Sigalova the Sutta, and even Puttadanta Sutta, Brahmins have been placed first. Why? Scholars argue the Buddha placed Brahmins as first because he wanted to reject the authority of Brahmins. That is why the Brahmins were placed first. Because if he placed Brahmins in the second place or the third place, he would have been able to directly challenge their authority because they were not first in the society anyway. So that is why he placed Brahmins in the first category in the caste system, because he wanted to reject the divine authority of Brahmins. And actually, he had told, the commentaries say that the Buddha had said, Brahmins generally make up stories. That is what he had said. He had told Vasita and Bharadraja, Brahmins generally make up stories. And that is how Vedic cosmology has developed, Brahmanic cosmology has developed. And Agganna Sutta is a direct answer, a direct rejection of Purusha Sutta in the Rig Veda. Because in Rig Veda, Purusha Sutta talks about evolution of society, cosmological evolution of society, and it talks about Brahma's or Lord Brahma's creation of the society, human beings, were being given to first Brahmins, and then the kingship, thereafter how the Suddas have been placed last in the society, being born from the feet of Brahma. So, and that system is Agganna Sutta is a direct answer, direct challenge of the Purusha Sutta in Rig Veda. Now, we need to, okay, now we spoke about Agganna Sutta. It's a very nice story. I invite all of you to read this Agganna Sutta, but then we need to understand the different perspectives. What different scholars said about Agganna Sutta. That is also important to understand, because it is not our opinion that matters. We need to survey, we need to examine what others said about Agganna Sutta. And the people who had among the people who had commented on Agganna Sutta, Richard Gombrich, Oxford scholar, he was a German, but Oxford University scholar stands out, and he said it's a satirical story, satirical discourse challenging Brahmanic teachings, Vedic teachings. And then he said that this really challenges Brahmanical cosmogony, and it's an answer to Purusa Sutta. He is the first one who said it is an answer to Purusa Sutta, direct critique of Purusa Sutta in Rig Veda, and he spoke extensively about the validity of what the Buddha said, that the ethical conduct is the main criterion of a person being elevated to a higher position. There is no other criterion. And I think that is why, that is what the Western societies practice. Western societies practice just that, because generally they elevate people with ethical conduct as superior in society, not wealth-wise, I'm not talking about economic wealth, but general wealth of experience, wealth of good conduct, behavior. That is why the Western world is generally placing the people with good conduct as good people. So that is a very powerful critique of uh, religious hypocrisy also, because sometimes we practice religion in a very hypocritical way, and it's a very direct answer to religious hypocrisy and social oppression. In the name of religion, we oppress people. There is social oppression in a lot of countries as a result of religious teachings also, and it's a direct result according to Gombrich. Then Eric Frowold, Austrian scholar, Vienna University, and he said something like this. He said, Agganna Sutta is the Buddhist theory of regression. Buddhist theory of regression, not progression. Because kingship, law and order is a result of the society degenerate, not progressing. A strong government is needed to arrest degeneration of the society. And he said, Accinteya Sutta is the Buddhist theory of regression, not progression. And then he also said that moral degeneration and and uh, and the fact that the moral degeneration necessitates the emergence of kingship and law. And it's a degeneration of society that necessitate kingship and law. And then he also said, and it's a very pessimistic view of the society. It's a very pessimistic view of the society. Eric Frowold, those are his comments on the Agganna Sutta. And then Stephen Collins, Chicago University, he was a Buddhist scholar, well-known Buddhist scholar, wrote many books. And his focus was the social contract theory in Agganna Sutta, how the theory counters ancient societal norm of divine right of kingship. The Sutta directly challenges divine right to kingship, and it talks about social contract as a result of social and moral decline, and not progress. Once again, it's not due to progress people selected and elected a leader, but it's due to the social degeneration that people selected and elected a leader. And then Damien Keown argues that Sutta is a humanistic critique of caste, divine groups, cosmic, social and decline is due to craving. Now, Damien Keown said, even the decline of cosmos is due to craving, in an overall sense. Why the world is degenerating, why the world resources are depleting is due to greed and craving. And this is it relates very well to what the teachings contained in Agganna Sutta. And then Haynes Becker and Peter Harvey said it's an outstanding exposition of ethical leadership. Those were their words. Outstanding exposition of ethical leadership, social contract as a precursor to the Republican ideal. And they spoke about the Agganna Sutta laying the foundation for the Republican governing system which is practiced world over, even in Sri Lanka, we have a republican system of government. But where we have deviated is republican system in most countries, where they have deviated is when they directly elect people without screening them, without selecting them. So that is why certain countries elect not so good leaders, because there is no selection process. So that is why Heinz Burkhardt and Peter Harvey said that it was an outstanding exposition of ethical leadership and social contract. And then Sri Lankan scholars also commented on this, I must say, because we should not limit our discussion only to Western scholars. Nalin Suarez. Nalin Suarez was a Sri Lankan Buddhist scholar, and he also spoke about early theory of contractual power. How the sutta actually it is a very I would say revolutionary for the time when this sutta was when this discourse was delivered by the Buddha, because there was no contractual social contract between the society and the king for the governing of the society. But this lays the foundation for contractual power. And then there was another scholar called Suwanda H.J. Sugunasiri, another Buddhist scholar, and he said Sutta is not a parody, but a scientifically informed cosmology. He argued that no, it's not just a story. He argued it's a very scientifically examined cosmological theory. Is Agganna Sutta, and actually it gave rise to a lot of criticism also. A lot of people did not accept the fact that that it's a well-examined cosmological theory, and a lot of scholars said no, it is not a cosmological story. Although it talks about cosmos, it tries to deliver a different message in a differently structured manner. And then actually, he also said that Agganna Sutta laid the foundation for this Big Bang theory. He specifically said that Big Bang theory came into being. People started talking about Big Bang theory after reading this Agganna Sutta, because that is how people got this idea that there was a Big Bang and the world system came. There was a period of contraction, period of expansion, and that is how the world system developed. So, but he attracted criticism. And then another critique is that early period of evolution is a departure from Kamma theory. Now, we should try to put it in the proper perspective. Agganna Sutta, if you carefully read it, there is no Kamma theory in Agganna Sutta. Beings being born, genders being developed, social degeneration, people, getting into theft and all kinds of bad or demeanors. So there is no Kamma theory in that. And one criticism is that Agganna theory does not talk about Kamma theory, although the Buddha delivered it. And as a result of that, some scholars think that in Agganna Sutta, a lot of sections were not delivered by the Buddha. And a lot of sections about especially the social contract theory. And especially things like these abhasara beings just descending into earth, and those sections people argue not delivered by the Buddha, but those were later additions to the sutta for better delivery and exposition. So that is another criticism, because sometimes because if you really see, early social contract theory is very revolutionary and quite new to that society, and it has a very, I would say, modern tone. This republican theory of government, people selecting and electing a leader, has a very modern tone, which is not very, one can argue that it is not very relevant to the Indian society that existed at the time. And then then it also one other area where scholars have said that late addition is basically this Agganna Sutta praises the Buddha in an extraordinary way. saying that only the Buddha could understand the origin of beings. And Buddha is elevated to a very much an exalted position in this Agganna Sutta. So the scholars argue that later the monks or arahants who delivered or who examined this sutta gave that elevation to the Buddha, only the Buddha could understand. So those sections were later additions the people argue. And then last point I want to highlight here is that there is a significant departure in Agganna Sutta cosmological aspect from what is in Abhidhamma. That is also important to understand because Agganna Sutta deviates very much from Abhidhammic teachings on cosmology, the beginning of the world system or evolution of the world system. So what are these differences? Now, in Agganna Sutta, the cosmology is used to critique Brahmanism. And it has a moral causation focus, not a cause and effect focus, but moral causation focus. And Agganna Sutta is also mythical and a little humorous if you read this. Sometimes it's a little mythical and humorous. But Abhidhamma is not humorous. It's not a story. And it's very analytical and very philosophical. And it deals with matrices and mental states. In Abhidhamma, cosmology is basically based on Chitta and Jaitasika. So Agganna Sutta is a very, very notable departure from Abhidhammic cosmological teachings. And then the second point is the second point is that Agganna Sutta begins with Abhasara Deva world, beings descending from the Abhasara Deva world, and it deals with only one world system. Agganna Sutta deals with only one world system, and it has a more moral, social, and political background. But what does Abhidhamma say about all this? Important to understand. Abhidhamma teachings talks about different world systems. 4 formless realms, 4 Arupavachara world, and then 16 fine material realms, and then 11 the sense desire realms, Kamaloka. And then it talks about humans, devas, hells, and animals. So Abhidhamma teachings are about different world systems, many different world systems, whereas Agganna Sutta deals with only one world system. It does not talk about any other world system. And then and in Agganna Sutta, everything is attributed to or caused by greed, based on greed. And that is why we have to take it not literally, but in a not a literal way, in an allegorical way, because everything is caused by the greed. And in Abhidhamma, conditionality and dependent origination. It's not based on greed. And here, sometimes one might say, okay, what is the difference between dependent origination and Four Noble Truths? Because, yeah, so I would say this in conclusion. Agganna Sutta is more aligned with Four Noble Truths. But Abhidhammic teachings are more aligned with Paticcasamuppada and dependent origination. What is the difference? What is the difference between Four Noble Truths and dependent origination? Four Noble Truths, everything is due to greed. Suffering is due to greed. But dependent origination, suffering is not due to dream. But ignorance. Ignorance. So that is the fundamental difference between Four Noble Truths and dependent origination. So Accinteya Sutta is more aligned with Four Noble Truths. And Four Noble Truths, now some scholars argue that it's a practical guide for better understanding of the suffering and end of suffering. But Paticcasamuppada, dependent origination, provides a more doctrinal, deep analysis of the Four Noble Truths or suffering. And while Four Noble Truths is easy to understand or easier to understand, dependent origination is very, very difficult to understand. Not in my words. Buddha himself told Venerable Ananda, dependent origination is very, very difficult to understand, because Ananda once said dependent origination is very easy to understand. Then he told Venerable Ananda, don't say so, because dependent origination is very, very difficult to understand. So Agganna Sutta gives a very practical framework of evolution of the society, and it's a notable departure from Abhidhamma teaching. So when you read Agganna Sutta, it's a very nice story. It's a very nice sutta, enjoyable, but you must understand that these are the critiques of Agganna Sutta, and this is how it deviates from other central teachings of Buddhism. So it's so it is something that you need to do more research, examine, try to understand yourself. So with that, I would conclude my talk, and if there are any questions, maybe I can take them. Thank you very much. Okay.